Anyway, look, tomorrow it's Holocaust Memorial Day, so we're going to remember those who lost their lives in the worst genocide in history.
But after the war, many people fought back against what happened. John and Jack's father, Boris Greinemann, may have been among them.
Yeah, so let's find out what's going on. John and Jack join us now. Good to see you both this morning. What can you tell us about your father and what you've discovered?
First of all, hi to my brother in Australia. It's amazing that we're speaking between Jerusalem, where I am, Melbourne, and you're in London, I assume. Right?
Yeah, we're in London. Yes, so we're spread across the globe like this. So what have you found out?
What have we found out? There's a lot of circumstantial evidence. One point you mentioned fighting Nazis. He fought Nazis during the war for years in the forests. So it wasn't just after the war. As my brother Sam said in the film, there was a war after the war. Jack and my experiences were very different. We're 15 years apart in age, 15 years older. So maybe Jack can add something, but he's putting together a book for the family now. And I've responded with creative efforts, written 2 novels based basically on my dad's story and my experiences as a son of a former partisan. Jack, maybe you want to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Hi there. Yeah, so our father was from Belarus. He's from a very large family. He was actually one of 9 siblings. All his family were murdered in the Holocaust except for one brother. And the way they survived was by being in the forests, and they joined up with the partisans, the Soviet partisans, and they actually were involved in a Jewish-only group called Nakoma. And so in that way, they got through the war, and they were watchmakers by profession. And eventually they both came to Melbourne, Australia to set up new lives. And my dad was 53 when I was born. So I was brought up by a more elderly, quieted father compared to my older brother, John. And so it became quite a shock to me when I heard this family story that he had possibly been involved with some action against Nazi collaborators who had also come to Australia after the war. Perhaps my brother will tell you what it was like growing up when my father was a bit younger.
Well, I was wondering, John, what it's like, especially as a rabbi, to know. I mean, I don't know if you know the details, but did your father? Are you convinced he pursued Nazis? Did he kill Nazis? I mean, how do you feel about all of that?
My answer is yes. I think he did. I know he was a very intelligent man and quite tight-lipped. I mean, he was a warm, gentle father in my experience of him, but he didn't talk a lot. My mother did most of the talking for the 2 of them, and he was a very skilled craftsman. By the way, he had a very good relationship with the local police station, who would come to him to repair their watches, and after a while he connected his jewelry store after a couple of robberies with the police station. I grew up in a home which was a center for Holocaust survivors. It wasn't as if I'd heard nothing about the subject. Both my brother Sam and I heard a lot. My mother tongue, until I went to school in Australia, and by the way, it's Australia Day today, 26th of January, and I value very much the country I grew up in. We grew up in a home that was a gathering place for survivors. And my dad and the local community was something of a hero. They knew that he had fought back, that he'd been awarded medals by the Soviets for bravery, and they would invite him to speak every Holocaust Memorial Day. He wrote a lot about his experiences in the Yiddish paper. I learned to read Yiddish. I saw his picture in the paper, and I overheard, and this is maybe what stimulated Jack to devote himself and encourage me to dig further, I overheard conversations about Nazis in Australia as a child. They would close the door and they would sit in the next room. We also had, amongst the survivors, fairly famous people come to visit us in Melbourne. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but there was probably the greatest Yiddish poet in the 20th century, a gentleman called Sutzkever, who came to visit a couple of times. And he was a partisan who'd fled a ghetto, and my dad was instrumental in saving his life. This man was already known as a poet and flown to Moscow from the forest. And he was the first survivor of a ghetto to speak in Moscow publicly. He also escaped the Soviet Union, and he was the only one in that particular meeting who did not say, "Long live Stalin," and so on. So I have no doubt, even though he made very successful efforts in covering his tracks, and there's no conclusive proof, I have no doubt personally that he was involved in knocking off Nazis during the war, right after the war. And my first novel, Far Away From Where, deals with a character based on my dad called Bora, who is knocking off SS men, and in Australia as well. I think he went to Australia, unlike what the detective in the film says, to chase Nazis. He went to Australia to start a new life in what he thought was a good country. And I grew up hearing all the time from him how much he appreciated democracy and freedom in Australia. It nevertheless led me to choose to live in Israel and pursue my Jewish identity much more deeply.
Of course, if your father was a Nazi hunter and did successfully bring Nazis to justice, maybe even kill them, I guess it'll be very difficult to find out any more details because it was very dangerous work. And frankly, it was very undercover as well, wasn't it? Jack?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. And the documentary explores that. It explores historical records, and the director, Danny Ben Moshe, has gone to great lengths to research the story. And it's quite an interesting story how I actually came across the director. So we just happened to have beach houses in similar locations in Melbourne, and I just by chance met him at a gathering down here. I'm here now, and then we started a conversation, and it went from there. That was the origin of the documentary, a chance meeting with this director who actually happens to originally be from England.
Okay, look, sadly, we've got to leave it there because we're out of time, but it's fascinating to talk to both of you and nice to be able to reunite you across the airwaves.
One in Tel Aviv, one in Melbourne. Yes, we're in London. Lovely to see you today.
Thank you very much
for that reason, it increased our contact, which was wonderful.
Yeah, you must.
There you go.
Yeah, well, it's easy to do now. And by the way, happy Australia Day.
Yes, indeed.